Hello, it's Michelle, and I'm here to do my monthly wrap-up. And today I'm going to be doing my wrap-up for October of 2021. I had a really weird, did I say weird? Reading month. I started out reading the book, Shade, and this is by Chad Nichols. I gave this book 4 stars. I did a individual book review video, and if you want to watch that, I will put a link down in the description box, and I'll also put a link to that video at the end of this video. I also did a mid-month wrap-up where I talked about the first half of the month, what books I read. The next book that I read was The Diva Spices It Up. This is by Krista Davis, and I gave this one 5 stars. Murder in the Wind by John D. MacDonald. I also gave this one 5 stars. If you want to hear more about any of those books that I mentioned, be sure to click on the link at the end of this video for my mid-month check-in. I get a lot more in depth with those books in that video. After reading The Diva Spices It Up, I just felt like I had to finish the series because I knew there was one more book. And I've been trying to not buy so many books lately, but I found that they had it on audio book and Scribd, and I have a Scribd subscription, so I decided to go ahead and listen to it. The latest book in this series is called The Diva Serves Forbidden Fruit. This book was really quite fun, actually, and it was fun to listen to. In this book, we've got a group of people that live in the town that are regular characters throughout the series, all feeling fear because a bunch of them had gone on a trip together, and when they got back, one by one, a bunch of them on that trip started getting murdered. And Sophie is trying to figure out who did it, of course, just like usual. I thought it was a fun story. I thought it was nicely done, the mystery part of it, but it did feel like there was a little bit too many side characters that kind of didn't have a point to the plot or to the storyline, which is kind of a pet peeve of mine. So I did end up giving it 4 stars instead of 5 because of that. But another little side note about the book is the title. I didn't understand the title. So if you've read this book and it makes sense to you, please let me know. But The Diva Serves Forbidden Fruit. I went into it thinking somebody would eat a piece of pie that had arsenic in it or something and die, or something like that. But something dealing with fruit in some way, shape, or form. I don't remember anything about fruit being in the entire book. So I was trying to figure out what the heck that meant. So if you know, please let me know. The next book that I read was Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Baart. This book is about a woman named Juniper who goes back home to help out a friend. One of her friends is a librarian and she needs to take some time off. She's sick. Juniper comes to town to take over for her at the library while she gets better. And while she's there, she decides to try to figure out who killed a close family friend years ago, because the prime suspect has always been her brother. And she doesn't think her brother did it. And there's a bunch of side stories to it. This book is a dual storyline where half the book is 14 years ago, before this murder took place, and the other half of the book is in current time. I really enjoyed this book for the first 50 pages or so, and then I started getting irritated. One, to me, this is more of a YA family drama than a thriller. So I felt like it was misleading reading that it was a thriller. I felt like the book was kind of all over the place. There was a bunch of storylines going on all at once, and a lot of characters that, once again, did not advance the plot or didn't seem to have a point in the story. The past part of the storyline was a real slow burn, and there was so many details of the past that I didn't quite understand why I needed to know. The book brought up a bunch of questions for me that I was really intrigued to hear the answer to. But I kept having a hard time picking it back up. I wasn't invested in it. I didn't particularly like any of the characters, not even the protagonist. I found her to be very, very selfish, and like she didn't really think things through very much, and she seemed very selfish. And so, and very dramatic about the past and what it means now, but without actually telling me what the past actually was. There's so many things that were brought up and mentioned, but never wrapped up. And I just, if an author's going to bring up something, could they please give me an answer in some way, shape, or form? I don't feel like I'm asking a lot. Maybe I am, because I keep encountering this in books. I also found the main character to be really immature. It just seemed like she was exactly the same as an adult as she was as a teenager. I mean, maybe, but I would have liked to see a little bit more advancement in the character. I guessed who the killer was pretty early on. There was a little hint there that I caught on to pretty quick. I think once a person reads enough murder mysteries or thrillers, if you see those little hints, it's pretty easy to guess who the killers are a lot of the time. I felt like the characters in this book were so one-dimensional. Like I just didn't care about any of them. And then the ending was super weird. And the questions that kept me going throughout the whole book were the ones that weren't answered. The ones that I really personally cared about. I wasn't sure what the point in bringing up all these other storylines was if we're not going to talk about any of it. I didn't really care for it. I gave it 2 stars, and I don't really recommend it. I don't know who I would recommend it to. Then I read The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon, and this one was an audiobook. So here's my little thing. I like to do an audiobook and a physical book all the time. Now, usually I can find whatever book I'm currently reading or one of the other books I'm planning on reading in my TBR stack for any given month in my Scribd account. But for some reason this month, I could not find any of the books on my TBR stack that I was planning on reading. So I decided to just kind of randomly pick another book to read as my audiobook. And it usually, if that's the only thing I'm doing with that book, I don't actually have a physical copy. It takes me a little bit longer to read it. This is another dual storyline book. There is the current storyline, which is a lady named Jax, who has a sister named Lexi. And at the beginning of the book, Lexi keeps calling Jax repetitively, and Jax is irritated by this because her sister is bipolar and she knows that she must be in one of her manic states, and she doesn't feel like dealing with it right now, so she ignores the phone calls and then finds out that Lexi has killed herself in the family pool. And so then she decides to go back home, obviously, for the funeral and to find out what the heck happened. The other storyline takes place in the 1920s, and it's Lexi and Jax's great-grandmother, Ethel. And this storyline is basically Ethel and her husband are newlyweds, and they really want to have a kid, and they're just not getting pregnant. And they find out that there's this spring that is a healing spring, and if you go to the healing spring and you declare your wishes, it'll make your wishes come true. So they decide to go do it. And they end up having a baby. But then they find out that this spring, this healing spring, comes at a cost. And that if you make a wish and it comes true, you will pay a price for the rest of your life. And this is a ghost story. It's a very haunting story. Hi, Zelda. I know a lot of people, when I read about the book later, a lot of people found it very scary. I didn't find it scary. I thought it was kind of chilly. Kind of chilling. A little bit of ice in there. But I didn't get scared at all. I just thought it was a creepy idea. The thought of getting a wish and then having to pay a price for the rest of your life. And it kind of felt reminiscent of Stephen King's Needful Things. I did enjoy quite a bit of this book, but once again, I felt like it's kind of weird how similar this one is to the last one. I felt like the characters were very one-dimensional, so I did not get emotionally invested in them. And by the last third of the book, I didn't care what happened to anybody. I felt like Ethel, the great-grandmother from the 1920s, was the most interesting character. And there were different things that happened in the book where I really had a lot of questions about these things, and I wanted to know what they meant or what was going to happen. And those were the things that were not answered for me. I just felt like there was a lot of pointless characters and pointless plot points that ended up going nowhere. And then the last third of the book was so disappointing. I didn't like the ending again. It was like, I just don't know. It was weird because things were so drawn out throughout the whole book. And then the last third of the book, things felt jumbled and like kind of thrown together and just rolled. Okay, fine, let's just finish the book. It was just so clumped together. And by then, I didn't care anymore. I was irritated. The whole way through, especially about halfway through on, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a 3-star book, I think. And then the last third, where all these things weren't answered yet again, I knocked it down to a 2. It's like, phew. So I don't recommend it. I didn't like it. I loved The Invited. That was a really good ghost story. And I love that Jennifer McMahon wants to integrate ancestral memory into current lives in her stories. Like, that's very haunting and it's a very fascinating subject, I think. But I just didn't like the delivery of it on this one. And it's funny because after I wrote my review out and, you know, had a chance to really think about how I felt about the book, I usually, especially if I can't stand a book, I'll go see what other people thought. And this book actually had a lot of 5-star ratings. A lot of people thought it was just the best book they ever read. And I don't know. I just didn't agree. But that's okay. We don't all agree on everything, right? This book took me almost 2 weeks to read. It was The Last House on Needless Street. And yes, part of it was that my husband was out of town and I was on the phone with him instead of reading a lot. But there's another reason too, and I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to tell you what this book was about. This book has 3 protagonists. We have Lauren, who is a teenage girl who can't leave home, and we don't know why. That gets revealed later in the book, but I'm trying to only reveal what's on the back of the book or in the first chapter or 2, because I feel like then it's not so spoiler-ish, right? Then we have her dad, whose name is Ted, and then we have Olivia, who is a cat who lives in the house. And this cat loves the Bible, and she's very esoteric. I just love her. She's my favorite character. I just think she's so cute. And a neighbor moves in with a secret. And this neighbor's secret really has the ability to kind of have things come crashing down around everyone in the story. I wanted to read you a little excerpt of this book because I just thought I liked the way it was written. It's a very fun, playful kind of writing, but also a horror novel. a psychological horror novel. This scene is the dad in the book, Ted, and he is talking to the cat. "I'm up," I say. "It's your turn to make breakfast." She looks at me with those yellow-green eyes, then pads away. She finds a disk of sun, flings herself down, and blinks in my direction. Cats don't get jokes. I fetch the newspaper from the front step. I like the local because it has a rare bird alert. You can write in if you see something special, like a northern flicker or a Siberian accenter. Even this early, the dim air is as warm as soup. The street feels even quieter than usual, hushed, like it's remembering. I really enjoyed her writing style. This book is a psychological horror. I think I just mentioned that, but it's scary in a psychological horror kind of way, but I don't remember it being gory or anything in any parts. But it was definitely a good, enjoyable read. It was a hard book to read, though, for me, and that's why it took me so long to read it. It's not that I didn't enjoy it. It's that it just so happened to kind of correlate with some things that might have to do with some of my therapy. It was like I was meant to read it right now. And what that is that if a person has been through abuse or trauma, it's very easy to mislead oneself into thinking maybe different things happened, or into forgetting things that happened, kind of blacking them out in an effort to survive and in an effort to deal with whatever had transpired in one's life. It really talks about abuse and its effects on people, and that's why I had such a hard time reading it, but I did really enjoy it. There was some twists and turns in here that I wasn't expecting. One of the characters I really related to because I felt like I was like them, where I've done a pretty good job of not remembering certain things in the past, or no, everything was fine when maybe it wasn't, that kind of thing. There was a couple scenes that I found kind of gross in here, and there was a big question that I personally had that was never in my mind answered. Maybe it was and I just didn't notice, but I thought it was such a good book. I really recommend it, especially if you're interested in learning more about the effects of trauma on people and the effects of abuse. I gave it 4 stars. And the only reason I didn't give it 5 was it is really hard to read, and there was still that lingering question that wasn't answered. And that's it. That is everything that I read in October. I'm hoping to read a few more books in November, although I don't really care how many books I read each month. If I get to 5 books, that's great. If I get to 10, well, that's really cool. But I don't really think it's too big of a deal. Like, I think some of us on BookTube put a little bit too much pressure on ourselves to read a certain amount of books every month or every year or whatever. And I think that kind of takes some of the fun out of it. So even though I didn't get to anywhere near as many books as I wanted to, I'm okay with that. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you want to read any of these books. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night. Happy reading. Bye.